Well,
Right.
I am certain.
Right. And I guess the same goes for India as well, who had
Right.
pretty deep ties
Absolutely.
with the former Kabul government. I guess before we wrap up here, Scott, tough question. I asked it to Danny a couple weeks ago, and that is the Afghan, Danny Sherjan, that is the Afghan war actually ending? It seems pretty clear that the U.S. doesn't have a choice at this point about ending the occupation, but there's a war going on in Somalia, and there's no U.S. troops there. So, Scott, do you think like a year from now, if I have you back on the show, we'll say that there's not like an ongoing U.S. war in Afghanistan?
That's a great question. I mean, I got to tell you, the Somalia is a hell of a lot easier to get to than Afghanistan. And unless the Russians are providing us, leaning on the Uzbeks or the Tajiks to provide us bases there for the northern route, I don't know what they're going to do. Some airstrikes with, I guess I'll put it this way. Yes, as long as there's an armed insurgency on the ground in the Panjshir Valley or whatever up there in the north, I guess you'd expect the Americans to try to back them. Although I don't think that's going to last very long, honestly. Um, but if there is armed insurgency over the long haul and continuing civil war, then yes, I would expect the CIA to be backing certain sides of that, and probably the worst sides rather than the least worst. Um, but as far as like a permanent drone war against Al Qaeda and all that, I mean, they just don't exist there, right? Like in Somalia, they're defining Al Qaeda so broadly that it includes Al Shabaab, right? So they could do that. They could start defining the Taliban as Al Qaeda again, and saying, oh, they're just terrorists. And anti-terrorism includes bombing the Taliban. But when Biden says anti-terrorism, he doesn't mean bombing the Taliban. He means not bombing the Taliban, you know. Um, and again, I just think it's a bunch of crap that there's a bunch of Al Qaeda guys in Afghanistan to attack. So, and if it comes to ISIS, I think the Taliban have all the incentive in the world they need to completely crush those guys right out of existence and take their place. And ISIS was only ever very small in Nangarhar province and a little bit down in Helmand, and then that's about it. They're certainly gone from Helmand, and I don't know if anything left of them exists in any real form in Nangarhar, other than just small networks of men. So honestly, I think they could probably just turn their back on the place. On the other hand, you know what? Hakan Sada might come back to Kabul, to Afghanistan, and go to Kabul and invite Ayman al-Zawahiri to be his national security advisor. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
If
Well,
that happens, then yes, expect the entire Special Operations Command to go back to Kabul and kill people.
Scott, so one thing about Afghanistan and Joe Biden is Biden actually seems to understand Afghanistan a little bit. And so I could definitely see
Yeah.
Joe Biden, unlike what Donald Trump or probably Kamala Harris could do, if somebody comes to them and say, we got to bomb these Haqqani guys, he could be like, even mushy brain Joe Biden knows that Haqqani doesn't equal Al Qaeda. But I
Right.
don't think Kamala Harris knows the difference. And so it may just depend on how
Right.
long Biden is even in office, because it sure seems like she could be baited more. I guess the other issue is that
Good
Biden
point.
has always wanted to wage like a CIA covert war in Afghanistan. And the other thing is even though and can explain that the whole China thing is stupid. That doesn't mean the U.S. national security state does, and so I could definitely see the CIA having a real advantage or a real a desire to just basically keep screwing things up in Afghanistan, training enough militants to make sure the Taliban have to constantly be at war, and if the Taliban are at war, then you could portray them as committing war crimes, and just sanction the Afghan state with the Taliban or something like that, and fit it into the great power pivot to Asia, new national security strategy they're really moving towards. I guess that's like kind of more my concern going forward, even more so than the or at least the Al Qaeda guys, at least until Joe Biden's no longer president.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I agree. The biggest danger is not the war on terrorism, continuing on in Afghanistan. It's the war for terrorism there, and some kind of deal with the devil to help the Taliban support the ETIM against the Chinese. something like that. That's the thing that concerns me the most. And it'd be stupid and hubristic and horrible enough, especially now after all of this, that I could see the Democrats trying it and the CIA.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thanks for so much for coming back on the show. There's been so many great articles on Afghanistan at antiwar.com. I wish I could have, asked you about more. That like Ray McGovern's article on holding the generals accountable this time is one of the most important things I think we have to do at this point. Is Stanley McChrystal, the great failure of Afghanistan, who got fired because he was doing such a poor job and acting like an idiot, gets millions of dollars for running Missouri's COVID rollout. That he got millions. The McChrystal group made millions of dollars off of that state for doing, and it's one of the worst states for like distributing the unemployment. They gave raw money to like 58,000 people. A whole bunch of poor people who probably spent all the money, then they asked for it back, kind of stuff. Just ruining people's lives that way, making them debt slaves to the government. And